Welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. Look at the headlines across the state, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a bigger story right now than the financial crisis in the city of Detroit. The trouble has been a long time in the making, years of institutional problems. But now there's a deal shaping up that will change the workings of City Hall and, if done right, change the course of Detroit. At the table, as always, on My Week, the editorial page editors of the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press, Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. Gentlemen, how are you?
We're well.
Surprised that you had us back after last week.
We got to have you back at the big table. I mean, come on. So let's take a look at where we are this week. We have a proposal on the table. Do you think this is going to do it for Detroit?
It may, but there's no guarantee. I mean, the new twist that the governor threw out yesterday in yesterday's proposal was spelling out in great detail what he expects the city to extract from the labor unions. And council's not so crazy about that. And this could end up being the deal breaker that brings in an emergency manager on Thursday.
Yeah, well, I think that's the hammer, right? If you don't do this, you're getting an emergency manager, right? This is the last opportunity they have to keep some say over how things work in Detroit and sort of respect the democratic institutions there. So if they say no, I think you get it only gets worse from here.
There's been so many there's a deadline, but now really this is the deadline. Now really this is the deadline. We're going to talk about the timing of this in a second, but let's see what it has taken for us to get there this week. The week started with the Financial Review Team's March 26 deadline. Yes, there is an official financial emergency in Detroit, but they did not recommend an emergency manager nor approve a consent agreement, instead issuing a report detailing Detroit's abysmal financial situation. Negotiations on a financial rescue plan between the state and the city intensified, even with Mayor Dave being hospitalized. Deputy Mayor Kirk Lewis took the lead and told reporters not only will an agreement have structural change, there will need to be cash from the state.
You can't sustain a turnaround unless you have some infusion of money. Because the things that we need to get done, and there's a complete list, things like a new payroll system, a new general ledger system, all of the things that are necessary to get done take money.
Speaking of money, on Tuesday, the City Council voted to borrow $137 million to make sure the city can function through April and May. And on Wednesday, Governor Rick Snyder addressed the crisis at a town hall meeting in Detroit. His goal, not to run Detroit, but be a, quote, supportive partner. He warned money wouldn't solve the problem.
It shouldn't just be about spending money. One of the big challenges, if you look at the review report that just came out, that Detroit has run a deficit since 2005 of significant dollars. It's borrowed over $600 million just to get by. It's just borrowing another $137 million. Now, my view is just spending more money to borrow more without structural change to say we need to see better services.
But Detroiters, many who are not happy with their leadership, are divided over whether they think any financial plan from the state will make a difference. The latest Detroit Free Press WXYZ TV poll shows 50% of Detroiters believe the mayor and city council should remain in charge. 44% say the state should step in. All right, now the City Council has a new proposal from the state and the mayor's office, though Mayor Bing hasn't signed off on it yet. Here's the details for you. In the proposed agreement, it will create a financial advisory board. The mayor and the council will still have some fiscal control, but the city will have to adopt a 3-year budget. It will create a project implementation office and provide a collaborative, performance-based process with legislative support to improve city services. All right, so the $8 million question here to you guys is, what is the difference between what we have proposal on the table compared to what Governor Snyder first brought out a couple of weeks ago?
Well, the original proposal was an emergency manager in name only. It allowed the governor to appoint this financial advisory board with some input from the city. And that board was empowered to really act as an emergency manager. The council and the mayor would have had little decision-making power and almost no implementation power. Now the governor has sort of moved toward the mayor and moved toward the council in this effort to avoid an emergency manager and to get an agreement. He's left the mayor with some authority, council with some authority, and he embeds this project manager into City Hall in a way that I don't know that anybody thinks is going to work, Steve.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it'll work. It's better, though, if you're the council. I think this is a much better deal than what he proposed 2 weeks ago. I mean, this leaves you in control of the finances with somebody looking over your shoulder to make sure you don't overspend. But it preserves that democracy that everybody keeps yelling and screaming about that is so important.
But does it fix the problem?
Well, I think the plan does fix the problem, but you have to still have a little faith that they'll do it. I mean, and that's, your first instinct is to feel a little bit like Charlie Brown in the football. Lucy says, "This time I will not."
No, really, I'm going to hold it for you, huh?
But
and we'll do this.
Look at this project manager. He's going to report to the mayor, and yet he's supposed to have the power to make the mayor act. You can see all sorts of ways this could walk off the dock if the mayor and his staff don't cooperate, and if this person isn't very forceful. This is not going to work.
Right.
Another concern that council and the mayor have to agree on a 3-year budget. It seems like every year that they have a problem getting the next year's budget in line, but this time they'd have to come back and say, all right, here's for the next 3 years what we're doing.
Well, I mean, that's how responsible governments budget, for starters. I mean, in Oakland County, they do multi-year budgets. The state tries to look out, and one of the important parts of this this proposal is a revenue estimating conference that they would have, so that they can forecast how much cash they're expecting and make budgets on realistic numbers. That makes 3-year budgeting much more possible than the way they do it now, which is just, well, we think we'll get this much money, and so let's go spend it.
Two big sticking points that I'm kind of seeing looking through this: money and the unions, the union agreements. First off, money. A lot of the council members said, well, we don't want to sign anything unless we're going to get some kind of influx of cash from the state. This proposal has no money attached to it whatsoever. And also, now talking about the union contracts, it says don't ratify the ones that you agreed on because that'll make this deal not work.
Well, two things. I mean, there's not going to be any money until there's a restructuring. The governor's been clear about that. Andy's been clear about that. Andy Dillon, the state treasurer.
The legislature is clear.
And the legislature is. There's not going to be any money unless there's a restructuring. On the unions, the council did a lot of posturing yesterday. They'll do a lot of posturing Monday and right up until the vote. But their choice is either throw the unions under the bus or accept a city manager that's going to eliminate all of their authority, and they'll have to lay off their staffs and shut down their offices.
And what are you hearing? Is this going to happen?
I think that there are 5 votes for this. I would like that if there were 6. I was disappointed to see Andre Spivey sort of trash the thing the way he did this week. But all you need is 5, and I think at this point you got to take what you're going to get if you're the governor, and this is a way forward. That's the point. It's a way to fix the problems that we have and get services going again.
All right. Well, I'd like to bring in Nancy Kafir into our discussion right now. She's a reporter for Crain's Detroit who's been covering the crisis in Detroit. She joins us now by Skype, actually, because she's on deadline right now. We're kind of snagging her from doing her work. Nancy, can you hear us?
She's on a tether, Christy.
Hi. You're on a tether at Crain's right now. We understand. Talk to me, Nancy, a little bit about what you're working on for your story and what it's been like the past couple of days in covering this.
It's been just a constantly moving target. That Lucy and the Charlie Brown and the football thing is applicable for reporters too. We think we've got a handle on the story, and then suddenly the goalposts change. But I think a lot of the questions about this. I think James Tate really hit the nail on the head with his question to Chris Brown and Kirk Lewis at the council meeting last night. Can they pull it off? If they agree to this document, what has to be done first, and how quickly does it have to be done to stop the city from running out of money? Where is you guys were talking about money or restructuring being tied to money being tied to restructuring? But you need money to restructure. It's always easier to, for example, if you were to set up a VEBA or if you were to try to renegotiate debt, it's always helpful to have money to put in. So, those are some questions that are still unanswered. How is this restructuring going to take shape? What has to be done first, and when? But
Nancy, they got the bond sale approved last week, and that should provide them enough operating money to get through till June at least, shouldn't it?
But what was said at council is that last night is that if they sign this agreement, the state will then sign off on that bond sale, which at council earlier this week, they claimed that the funds from the bond sale had to be released by 1 p.m. today.
By Thursday, right.
But they haven't voted on the agreement yet. So does that mean the state hasn't signed off on it? And they're not to vote on the agreement till Monday. So that's a concern.
One of the things that the governor has said pretty consistently is that he believes that there is more money that can be directed to city services already in the city. That if you manage things a little better, if you're a little more efficient with things, you would free up enough money, for example, to get buses on the roads, to maybe get the lighting fixed. What's your sense of that, Nancy? Is that true?
I think definitely in the grants department, there's a lot of money that isn't being spent. They get a lot of money in from the federal government that isn't allocated quickly enough. It sits waiting unused, and the federal government so far has expressed no willingness to yank it back. They want Detroit to use that money, from everything that I've heard. The DDOT, management of DDOT was recently outsourced to Parsons Brinkerhoff, and their agreement has some very specific performance-based payment goals in there. And one of the possible items in their work agreement to run DDOT is the development of a new governance system for DDOT. So clearly, there's some sense that there are changes to be made there that could result in savings or better service, or hopefully both.
Nancy, I want to jump into a little bit about how Detroiters are feeling about this entire deal, the proposed agreement, because both of you gentlemen wrote this week about the reaction to the financial review team meeting. And Nancy, I know that you were there when there were a lot of people protesting, the yelling, the singing. Both Nolan and Stephen, you talked about how this isn't really representative of what Detroiters think. Nancy, I was watching your Twitter feed, and at points you were like, I'm not even quite sure what's going on because I can't hear over that. What kind of frustration is it to cover something like that when you've got those loud voices, but you know that perhaps that maybe they don't speak for everyone?
Well, as Suzette Hackney from the Free Press tweeted during that meeting, matters crucial to Detroit's financial future could be being discussed right now, but we'll never know because we can't hear them. My instinct is always to say, many years ago, I covered a small town in Mississippi called Petal, and some angry people showed up at a Board of Aldermen meeting one time, and one of the council people said to them, this is a city with a population of 10,000. He said, there are 10 of you who are here angry. That means 9,990 of you are at home and happy. I won't go so far as to say that the, 700,000 Detroiters who didn't show up at the meeting, 700 and whatever, there were about 100 people there on Monday. I can't math on the fly. I'm not going to go so far as to say the people who weren't there are happy, but they're people who didn't prioritize coming down to the meeting to make their feelings heard. And maybe that's because they have jobs, they have kids, they have some reason they can't get down there. But still, 700,000 people in Detroit, 100 people at the meeting. Do the math.
But when are we going to expect that these new Detroiters, or the influx of new people who are moving in and want to make Detroit a priority and changing the way things are done, when are we going to expect to see them show up at some of these meetings?
And that's key, because we keep talking about changing Detroit's image. Well, the image the world saw of Detroit last week was Malik Shabazz standing up and saying, we'll burn it down before we'll let you take over. So these other Detroiters, the folks who are out there trying to build lives and raise families and are worried about their lights and their buses, have to start showing up and supporting good decision making.
But they're showing up where where it's important to show up. They're showing up at the polls. If you look at the votes that have been taken in this city over the last 3 years, people are voting for change. And it's not just the new people, it's the people who've been here for a long time. It's the old lady living on the east side with no lights
people
and
are still hanging
no crime protection from crime. Those people are starting to think and vote differently, and that's what really matters. It doesn't matter who goes and screams.
Last word, Nancy, we got to go. Go ahead.
I believe that your typical Detroiter is probably like a 60-year-old woman who's lived in the same house since she got married 40 years ago, and she wants her lights to work, and she wants her garbage to get picked up, and she is concerned about, she wants some accountability, but she wants services more than anything else. I believe in that lady. I believe she exists, and I believe that she's kind of voting with her feet by not showing up to these meetings. She's telling you something different than what Malik Shabazz is telling you.
All right, Nancy Kafir from Crain's Detroit, thanks so much for joining us. Have a great weekend. Good luck on Deadline. We'll be reading. And real quick, before we wrap up our discussion about Detroit, April 5th deadline. Is this indeed the deadline that if council doesn't vote on anything, if they decide not to vote, that there has to be an emergency manager?
I really mean it this time.
Well, people are wondering at home, when is the real deadline?
And who knows about deadlines? They've come and they've gone. But under the law, they've either got to act by Thursday, the governor has to act by Thursday, or it starts all over again. I talked to Andy Dillon last night and again this morning, and I sensed this growing frustration. The governor said the other day he's running out of patience. I really feel that the likelihood of an emergency manager went way up over the last few days.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm sure we'll be discussing this again next week on MiWeek.